Nutcracker podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Global Nutcracker. Today, with me, I have a very interesting guest with an amazing company. Cannot wait for you guys to hear the story about Sama. And I have Wendy here, the CEO of the company. Welcome, Wendy. Thank you very much, first of all, for being with us here today and telling us the story about your company. So, thank you so much for being here again. Tell us more about Sama. What is Sama? What is the name meaning? How did you come up with the idea? Everything about it.
Well, I'm really glad to be here. Web Summit's been a lot of fun. So, Sama was actually founded on a social mission, and our mission is to sustainably move people out of poverty by providing them full-time living wage jobs and doing that in underserved communities where there are the greatest barriers to employment. So, Sama actually means equal in Sanskrit, which that's our philosophy is people deserve equal access to opportunity. So talent is distributed equally, but opportunity is not.
Yeah.
And we're there to open the doors and create job pathways.
Yeah, that's amazing. How did you come up with the idea? How exactly you thought, okay, this is what I want to create. This is what will make an impact or a change to the world? Because the way I see your mission is actually changing the world in a way.
Yeah, so our founder really launched us with the idea that, there's aid and world aid, solves problems. But what people don't necessarily want or need is not just mosquito nets. They want jobs. They want agency and financial independence. And so it really started with this idea that the best way to solve poverty is not through aid. It's really through providing financial independence and employment. So our mission has been to leverage where there's demand for jobs outside of these communities where they don't have opportunities in front of them to be able to create digital opportunities.
Which markets do you operate in right now?
So we operate in Kenya and Uganda. So that's where the majority of our employees are.
Okay. Tell me more about the markets. How is the AI adoption actually? There is a really cool story that you told me about your research about Kenya actually having way higher adoption of AI compared to the US. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So while the actual volume of registered users, for example, for something like OpenAI might be the largest in the U.S., in terms of adoption, it's highest actually in countries like India, Pakistan, and Kenya. So there are more than a third of the population, like the entire population, leveraging these tools on a daily and weekly basis.
And why is that, do you think? What have you found out? Why is that?
Yeah, I think it's because these are young, kind of digital first communities, and so, for example, in India, it's extremely well adopted in India as well. Well, they kind of leapfrog from going like traditional infrastructure to mobile, and that's the same thing in Kenya. So you've got a really youthful population. In fact, in sub-Saharan Africa, there are going to be more working people in sub-Saharan Africa in 2030 than all of Europe. So it's a very fast growing population, and they're all using their mobile phones and digital first.
Yeah, that's amazing. And growing from one market to another market and so on, what is the biggest challenge? Or if I know it's not one challenge, right? What are the challenges? What are the nuts that you had to crack to actually expand the way you want to expand and bring that mission? Because you are a mission-oriented company, which I love. But what are the challenges here?
Wow. Well, when you're operating a truly global company, there are plenty of challenges from the regular ones, which are basic things like time zones. But what's interesting about our companies, we knew coming into this that we were going to be global first. And so we have offices in Kenya, Uganda, Montreal, Canada, San Jose, Costa Rica. I'm based in California, in the U.S. in the Bay Area. And so we really approach this as what are the overall value sets and mission that we want to communicate? And then how do we communicate in a way that speaks to everybody?
Yeah.
So we have a philosophy. All of my leaders, they read the culture map because the way people communicate is genuinely different, right? In East Africa, it tends to be just a little bit more hierarchical. In the U.S., it's extremely flat. Anybody can, the open door policy is true. So how do you take those philosophies and those values and cascade them to every culture in a way that every culture can, interpret, adopt, and value?
Yeah, and how do you do that? Because it sounds familiar, right? I think every startup, especially the startup that's care about company culture, which for me it's a must, right? How have you managed to do that? Or it's not a one-time thing, right? You have to do it basically every day intentionally. How do you do it in your company?
Yeah, so it's such a good question because I think that's exactly it. It's intentional. It's interesting because our team is roughly 3,000, almost 4,000 people globally. The majority of those folks are actually in East Africa. So when we're speaking, we're having our communications both on our values and our company objectives, not just our mission, but what are the financial goals and business goals that we have to achieve. One is repetition. I know that sounds like very basic, but we try to keep consistent with our themes. It also, again, sounds very basic, but say what you're going to do and then do it
Yeah.
and follow up. The follow
Yeah.
through is incredibly important. So we focus on creating a consistent set of communication. But then I think it's also really incumbent that you meet people where they are, right? So um, we all have different ways in which we communicate. And one of the things that we always try to encourage is we want to hear feedback. We want to hear, ideas and challenges. Well, in a place like the US or for example in Canada, people are pretty vocal.
Yeah.
They will
Yeah.
say, I don't like that. I do like that. In other areas, for example, in Kenya and Uganda, we really need to create a safe environment, right? To be able to say, okay, let's start with sharing some of this feedback and creating an environment in which people feel like they can actually communicate because it's a little bit more of a hierarchical community, and so there's less comfort. So if I'm going to, for example, seek feedback from a staff that's a few levels below me, I will probably ask, permission, if you will, from their manager to say, hey, this is what a context of our objective is. And they may then give that individual a heads up. Whereas in the US, I might just walk to the person who's a few levels below and say, like, hey, what do you think?
Yeah, yeah. That's great. And who are the people that are actually doing this in your company, right? Because you've mentioned you have how many team members?
So we have roughly 3,500 people in the company
3,500
globally.
people.
Yes. And so
That's
it's a pretty large team. About
exactly.
100 of those are going to be our software
Hmm.
engineers, product people, salespeople that are both getting customers and building our platform. And then we have a large operational team. And so most of the team is actually in East Africa. So
Hmm.
that the annotators, so we are a data labeling and curation company. So the people who actually do the annotations, the classification, and structuring of the data all sit in East Africa. All of the management and support staff sit there as well. So we have engineers, project managers, finance people. And so what's interesting is because we're global, I don't have a single leader in my team who
Yeah,
reports to me that doesn't have team members across every region. So everybody has team members in East Africa as an example.
that's amazing. So I guess in a way you have to put the right people in the right role to make sure that your mission, your culture, and the values are distributed. Are these people, just trying to connect what we have done in native teams as well? Are these people who are here, let's say, from the beginning of the company, or people that you actually, joined later but have that, let's say, vision oriented, culture oriented, localization oriented mindset that you put in the right position to, you know, do it for the person next to them on both sides? Because usually that's how it works. You have to take care about the person next to you in order to keep that mission alive within such a big company as yours.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there are the basic things like our values are posted everywhere, as an example, in our offices. But I think it's also about hiring, right? And so, you have to make an assumption that the people coming in, they either have the skill sets or you're going to train them, right? So, in some of our with our social mission, we do a lot of training, but you also have to make sure that when you're hiring, for example, in our corporate staff, it's really about the values. So you got to assume that they're you know the bare minimum bar is to have a level of competence and competency to be able to do the position. But it's really about that cultural fit and values. So we make it a practice to interview with culture and values first because they probably wouldn't make it in the door anyhow if they didn't have the qualifications and the experience. And that's incredibly important. And then you reinforce that as we were talking about through communications and most importantly actions. Values on a poster really don't mean anything if you don't follow them through. And so, little things, which can include recognizing people for living their values. So we do, regular kind of awards and recognitions that are kind of crowdsourced or sourced from our employees so that we can really recognize when and as I like to say, catch people doing things right.
Thank you, Wendy, for such an insightful answer. I totally agree with you on that one. How do you measure success? I'm interested in your company. What are the KPIs for success? Not only on, we're not talking about numbers and so on, but how do you measure success in how well you have introduce your company culture, and because it's a diverse company, right, and a mission and so on, how do you measure how successful you are, and when do you need to make changes in some areas?
So really in a couple of ways. Certainly from an employee standpoint, we have employee engagement surveys,
Hmm.
right? So we measure those, we benchmark them, quarter over quarter to see how we're doing. And they include, questions on sort of vision, culture, values, inclusivity, things of that
Yeah.
nature. And then what we find is that the rest of how we measure also plays an important role because a big part of how people are both adopting and understanding the culture is, do they have clarity and like alignment to what their purpose is? At the end of the day, why do we have vision? Why do we have values? Why do we have these like company objectives and key results and things of that nature? Is to be able to outline a plan and then every individual knows how they can contribute to it, right? Whether it is how they live, living values and inclusion, or what their performance is. I think it's really tied very strongly to not just about like, hey, are we living those values, but more importantly, how do they apply to what I do every single day,
Yeah.
and how do I contribute towards our end company objectives? And if you can provide that clarity, I think it's very powerful.
Yeah, love that. Love that. I'm gonna go back a little bit from when you actually went to Nairobi and Uganda. I'm interested, like, what was the biggest cost and time investment? Was it like the physical infrastructure, or was it cultural infrastructure in terms of training and adoption when it comes to people?
Yeah, it's definitely the latter
All
because
right.
at the end of the day, you can't really establish in the location if there isn't infrastructure. For example, in rural Uganda, we actually were part of helping create some of the physical infrastructure, but that's just like table stakes to get started.
Yeah.
Like you can't without energy, without internet, without reliable energy internet, physical infrastructure. And so we did make some investments, of course. We're an ISO certified company. We put in, biometrics and all those other kinds of things to ensure that we could provide enterprise grade service. But most importantly, probably the biggest lift was really around talent, the ecosystem training. And as sort of an early adopter, one of the earlier companies in these regions, a lot of where the lift was is making sure we could find sort of the ecosystem of talent
Hmm.
that could then train, hire, and recruit everybody else. And so the best practice we've seen is you kind of got to start with an anchor leader who knows the community, who knows the talent, knows the universities, things of that nature, and then they can kind of establish that base.
Yeah, that's right. Like, you can't do anything physically if you don't have the right people. So you basically invested first in people, training, and everything, and then in what follows. Perfect. And let's say you've time and money. You have all of the time in the world, all the money in the world. What would be the next destination, the next market you would like to scale to?
Oh my gosh, all the time when I look, well, so many different countries. So our base really is sub-Saharan Africa. So we've looked into Rwanda, Madagascar, many Western Africa locations like Ghana, and Nigeria. So yeah, there's so much incredible talent. There's a real need to drive additional employment. So we'd stick with our roots.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. And my last question for you. If you have to pick three words today, what is the key to scaling successfully?
Ah, well, I'm not sure if this is three words, but I would say it's meeting people where they are. Hey, everybody is on different spectrums of the adoption scale, and I think more now than ever, especially with Gen AI tool adoption, the way in which we're working is really changing, right?
Yeah.
And the biggest barriers to that successful deployment, whether it's innovation, automation, because things are changing so rapidly now. I don't know that many companies who can put a vision out there, but to build like a detailed technical 3-year roadmap, it's like impossible, right? Things are changing so frequently. You're looking at things by quarters and halves and beyond. So you need the North Star to identify that. But at the end of the day, you got to meet people where they are because it's all about change management. It's all about people leveraging technology at their pace and in the context. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, our value is our context,
Yeah.
not the syntax.
Exactly. Love that. Love that, Wendy. And I think, you guys, this is the perfect way to end this podcast. Meet people where they are. I think I love that. And it will stay as the highlight of this podcast, Wendy. Thank you so much for being here again. I wish you all of the success in the world with Sama. I think you
Yeah,
have an amazing mission. So thank you for being here.
appreciate it. It's been a
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Go not nuts.